Well, last week, Mark Ogden talking about the possible takeover at Newcastle, saying, well, they can't buy into the Premier League elite after takeover like Manchester City did. Well, to discuss this further, we welcome Craig Burley and first Gab Marcotti into the conversation. Gab, what sort of budget are we talking here? Why can't they spend lots of money?
Well, the short answer is that they can't unless they grow the revenues, and that's for the simple reason that there was no financial fair play, both the UEFA version and the Premier League version, back when Manchester City started investing heavily in the team, and obviously there is now. The good news, if you're a Newcastle fan, is that this is a club that every year that it's been in the Premier League over the last 8 seasons has actually made a profit. The one year they made a loss was 3 years ago when they were in the when they were down in the Championship. So it's not like they're inheriting losses, and the Premier League rules say that you can make losses of up to 105 million over 3 seasons, and obviously they're going to carry over a profit. I think it was something like 20 odd million in their last published accounts. Similarly, in Europe, it's slightly different because there's been a change of ownership. Newcastle could apply for what they call a voluntary agreement. And what that means is that you can exceed the financial fair play limits for losses over a 3-year period. You can exceed them for a time if you present a plan of how you're going to grow revenues 3 years, 5 years down the line. If you do that, you can go and you can spend more heavily in the short term. Of course, you have to grow those revenues. Big question mark is going to be where those revenues are going to come from, because obviously if they come from Saudi, they're going to be scrutinized in terms of potentially being related party revenues. So long story short, you just want a number. I don't know if I can give you a number, but I think with sales, off the top of my head, finger in the air, I could probably imagine them having a net transfer deficit probably pretty comfortably, approaching 100 million in their first season.
And of course, since these stories have started, Craig, every man and his dog has been linked to Newcastle, the latest being Coutinho. If you're in charge of that transfer budget, where would you spend it?
Just in case you're wondering, Dan, I also can't give you a number on this financial fair play shenanigans. I've said all along, I think I said last week, in terms of the potential excitement around a change of ownership, which there always is for the supporters, particularly of the bigger clubs. You start the building blocks, I think, with management. And first and foremost, I think they have, if they do get this through and they do take over Mike Ashley, I think you make a statement first by putting the structure in place, the football structure in place, and particularly the manager in place. And then you look at the playing staff. You mentioned Coutinho, Koulibaly, all these players that are going to be chased, particularly Koulibaly, by some of the most successful clubs of the modern era. So that's what you're up against. But for me, you start with management and structure, and then it snowballs from there. Because if you get the right man in charge with the promises, of course, every manager gets promises, and they're not always adhered to. But if he has a sense of the direction the club's going in, you've got a better chance of enticing that player to the club. Of course, you're going to have to pay top dollar as well.
How likely is that, Gab, a Pochettino to Newcastle?
I mean, I think it's going to depend on the outlook, on the budgets, on what they can offer him in and I hate to use the word project, but this really would be a project at this stage. The funny thing about Newcastle, I mean, one mark against them, if you will, is that compared to Manchester City, obviously, you're talking about a less wealthy area of the country. You're talking about a smaller catchment area. So then you have to kind of grow the revenues quickly, grow the fan base quickly, kind of in the rest of the world. We know the fan base is enormous in Newcastle, but it's not as spread out as some other clubs are. It's not a global brand. It's not United or Liverpool or whatever. So you have to have a plan in place to be able to do that. One thing that could swing it in Newcastle's advantage is that we don't really know what the transfer market is going to look like, once it reopens, once the pandemic is under control. We're hearing lots of stories about how, a lot of clubs are taking a hard economic hit, and so they're going to want to go and try to raise cash quickly by selling stars. And so you could have a situation where, maybe not the very highest tier of superstar, but the next tier down, where the prices for those, you could have more supply than demand, frankly. And if you're a cash-rich club, which in the short term Newcastle could be, that's a market where in which you can do really, really well.
On the other side of this, Dan, and maybe Gab can throw a few names in there off the top of his head. But if we're just, banding names about managers that are out there, Allegri's been looking for a job, but I think he's quite prepared to be patient. Pochettino's out there, somebody whose stock had risen quite, very high before it took that little dip. But I think the problem is, particularly for him, is the jobs that might have been out there, and we were talking about this maybe 3 months ago when he left Tottenham, around that period, what jobs are going to become available? It doesn't look at this moment in time like the United job is going to come available, and that was a chance of happening at the time. It certainly doesn't look like, because of this coronavirus pandemic, that many are going to come up. Juventus are probably going to stick with Sarri. Potentially the PSG job might come up. But most of the jobs, Real Madrid are not going to change their manager. So he's sitting there, Pochettino, as a young manager, a guy that wants to get back in relatively quickly, but make the right decision. Because we saw, for example, David Moyes get the job at Man United. It didn't go well for him. He got sacked. He rushed into a couple of jobs, and it went horribly wrong. So for Pochettino, he's got to make the right decision. But that decision also is based around the fact of how long does he sit and wait to make a potential decision. Bayern Munich have given Hansi Flick a new contract. That job's not going to be available. So he's sitting there and he's running out of options at this moment in time. And the longer you're out the game, the more people forget about you. It's as simple as that. So it's going to be an interesting 6 months or so for Newcastle United and for those big-time managers that are out the game at the moment.
Right, Craig, let's play fantasy. Yeah, Pochettino is in charge. If you were him, who was the first player you would go for who would feasibly make that move to Newcastle to join the squad?
Well, again, I go back to my point about building a structure, Dan, and it comes down to finances, clearly. But for those that potentially are available, you're either starting at your goalkeeper or your centre-half position, and that would be Koulibaly. I'm all for playmakers, but I think you've got to get a good spine to the team. And if I thought I could get somebody like that, I would. You're looking at free transfers as well to balance off any potential budget that you're going to blow on the bigger players. And then you might be looking at some younger players. A lot of talk about the likes of Phil Foden at Manchester City. How much game time is he going to get? Could I go to a club? I'm just throwing that name out there, but there are probably several others at these clubs not getting game time or not getting enough game time. Can I go and try and get one of these younger guys away from these clubs, whether it be on loan or for a fee? Could I coax a club into selling one of these players or loaning one of these players to get game time? I think that's the kind of thing you would be looking at. I don't think you're looking at going back to your former club in Tottenham and trying to blow the budget out of the water for a Harry Kane or anything like that. I think that's just a bridge too far. But I think if you've got enough money, there are potential to bring in good quality players. Whether you could get somebody like Koulibaly with all the other clubs that would be interested in him, Dan, remains to be seen. But I certainly think building that spine to the team is the first and most important thing to do, and then you can add the flair around about it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's Monday, which of course means Marcotti's musings. You can go and peruse them at your pleasure over on the website. Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.